Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dabo Swinney, the Clemson Tigers, on an absolute warpath since losing to Georgia in the opener. Now head on the road to play Florida State in a game that, 5 weeks ago, we had circled on all our calendars. Now, not so much. Florida State just trying to find answers. I don't think I have the answers. I don't think a lot of Florida State fans, quite frankly, have the answers to. The roster is what it is. Like, you missed on some guys in the transfer portal, but this team consistently comes out and is just grossly underprepared to play a football game every single Saturday. Not playing up, the talent isn't as good as we thought it was, but they're certainly not even playing close to what this roster should be looking like on the football field. And then Clemson. I'm excited to get into this offense. Like, this offense has found some life. Now, before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And these preview prediction episodes, they've been a blast for the boys. The amount of support y'all continue to show means the absolute world. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, let it fly in the comment section, whether you're a Clemson fan and we're talking about this offense. Would love to hear your takes. If you're a Florida State fan, would love to hear what you think, how you think Florida State turns it around. If you have an answer, I certainly do not. Without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start with this Clemson offense. 42 points per game. That is number 10 in the country. 7.1 yards per play. That is 15th in the country. Although Cade Klubnik had less than a 50% completion percentage last night against Stanford, you're still putting up 40 points because you're explosive on offense. This is what we were banging the table for heading into 2024. You didn't quite see it against Georgia week one. You've seen it the last three football games. This Clemson offense looking extremely hard to stop the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think one of the encouraging things is they certainly didn't play their best ball. I think their offensive line had some real issues in pass protection at time, especially picking up some stunts in some of the blitzes Stanford was throwing at them. But I think you kind of hit it. I mean, the fact that they can hit explosive plays relatively consistently, I think you kind of start to see why Clemson was maybe so much struggling a couple of years ago. Because if things didn't line up and they weren't pretty damn near perfect, they'd typically struggle to put anything up on the board. I don't think that was nearly their best game. It was miles behind maybe the NC State game and some of these other games they've had since Georgia. But they were still able to put points on the board because they have an explosiveness into their offense.
That's a great point. Like, last year, Clemson fans, we're probably sweating it out late Saturday night. Like, Clemson probably wins that football game against Stanford, but it's probably a lot more uncomfortable than a lot of us would have liked on Saturday night. But because you can find those explosive plays, you're not necessarily sweating. Okay, the offense didn't have a night where they seem completely in rhythm. It doesn't really matter when you can hit the explosive plays like Clemson can. And Dill, now the question is, why has Clemson been hitting the explosive play? I think it starts with difference makers working vertically down the field. The Clemson fans were probably so sick and tired of me getting on here in the summer and just talking about this Clemson offense, talking about the verticality, talking about the deeper third. Probably said that probably 25 times over the summer in terms of what Clemson needs to do. They have it now. And I think it starts with true freshman Brian Wesco. Dill, last year, this Clemson offense just felt so condensed. It didn't have a guy that could work vertically down the field. You inject a guy like Brian Wesco into this offense. Not only is he averaging, I have it in my notes here, I believe 34 yards per reception, but he's a guy that's opening it up for a guy like Jake Bringenstool underneath, or a guy like Antonio Williams, and then also like the run game. Like, if you're an opposing defense, you can't play a single high safety against Clemson anymore because they got guys that can beat you vertically. So if you're going to play two high safety, you give Clemson a light box, they're getting the run game going, running the football for 6 yards per carry. That's number 9 in the country. Dill, this is kind of what we were banging the table for. And at least as a college football fan, I'm just fired up to kind of see it coming to fruition in 2024.
And I think against Florida State, what I'm really going to be looking for is how this offensive line responds. Because I still think, Florida State can kind of rush the passer. Yes. Their interior defensive line against the run, they feel a little bit checked out in a sense in this. Like, they just don't want to grind it out. I think their defensive ends don't really want to grind it out in the run game anymore either.
Patrick Payton certainly do not.
So that seems like a bit of an issue, but they're still rushing the passer at a pretty high level. So again, I think Blake Miller needs to have a better game. I thought he just didn't look in sync. Him and Walker Parks, just like they weren't picking stunts up. They were like blocking in weird ways. It felt like I'm looking for those two to put a better performance on the field because, frankly, I thought the left side played pretty well. I'm looking to see what they can do and how much better they can get against a team that I do think if they don't pass protect, I think Florida State can give them a bit of problems on the defense side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, if there was if there's one positive that we've seen over the last 5 games for Florida State, it was during that game against Cal. You had 7 sacks, 12 tackles for loss. You were extremely disruptive and honestly won the football game. Nothing else was working, but the pass rush was. And so if you're a Clemson fan, yeah, you're probably excited to see what this offensive line can do on the road against the pass rush that look, it's not as good as we thought it was, but it's still a solid pass rush in terms of ACC standards. Dill, I think the second thing I'm looking at, the run game, and more particularly, working a lot of play action. Go back to week 1 against Georgia, 5% of the dropbacks. I think he had only 3 dropbacks were in play action. And that partially was a little bit of game script, right? Guy kind of got out of the football game in the second half, but like partially just wasn't really part of your offense. You fast forward 4 games through the season, 45% of dropbacks for Cade Klubnik have been on play action. He's averaging a 73% completion percentage, 7 touchdowns to 0 interceptions. That has seemed to be another thing that when you get that run game going and you start having safeties and linebackers kind of getting sucked in, that's another thing that you can work kind of over the top. Another thing that I really like about Clemson on the offensive side of the football. And again, I think at the end of the day, that there's one other thing I have in my notes. Florida State's defense has been largely a disaster. And I think it's kind of schematically, the matchups are so bad. You go back to that game against SMU. I mean, they have Blake Nicholson, a linebacker that I think might have a bright future, but certainly is not great right now, to kind of put it respectfully. One-on-one with RJ Maryland multiple times in that football game. Dill, you got another really good tight end, Jake Bringestool. Clemson's been using some pre-snap motion, have been working on getting matchups that they like. And with all this firepower that Clemson has, I don't know if Florida State has the guys. Like, if you're going to get Jake Bringestool one-on-one coverage with any of the Florida State linebackers, you're going to that every single day of the week on Saturday night.
And especially because on the boundary, I don't think the matchup necessarily overwhelmingly favors Clemson.
That's true.
The boundary corners, again, there's still some pockets of this Florida State team that are very, very good.
Yeah.
The problem is the spots that they're bad, linebacker, defensive tackle, they're really, really bad. And they're obviously getting exploited quite aggressively for the most part in those spots. So, again, I think you look, Clemson actually probably matched up pretty well because obviously you have Brenningstool. You have Antonio Williams, who's playing really, really well, I feel like, in his resurgence, along with the boundary threat that Brian Wesco and TJ Moore.
I was going to say, not a coincidence that you get Brian Wesco going. Antonio Williams starts feasting a little bit underneath. I'm totally with you. Let's flip sides here. Florida State's offense. I don't know what quarterback you're going to see. It's been Dill, the thing is, like, I get Florida State fans want to see Brock Gunner, want to see Luke, and quite frankly, I do too. Something's got to change. I don't know if it matters, though. Like, this offense can't run the football. 2.5 yards per carry is 129th in the country. They're averaging 15.2 points per game. That's 114th. They can't run the football. They can't pass protect. They don't really have wide receivers that can separate. And so you look at some of these matchups in this football game, Clemson. By the way, Barrett Carter played his best football game. Barrett Carter's played a lot of good football games. That was probably the best we've seen Barrett Carter play in a while against Stanford. That fired me up. You have Sammy Brown certainly coming on. When you look at this matchup, you kind of think hard to see Florida State run the football on Clemson's front seven. You feel like you're going to see a lot of 3rd and longs, and it's hard to see Florida State's offensive line protecting whoever's playing quarterback. It's awfully hard to find an avenue for Florida State to consistently move the football against Clemson here.
I mean, this is the best defense they've seen all year, and I don't even think it's particularly close margin, frankly, with the next best. Maybe it's Georgia Tech or Boston College. I'm not even sure. And they haven't really been effective in a single second on the offense side of the ball, aside from maybe the first drive in that Georgia Tech.
The first drive.
It's been way downhill. So I don't see – I'm kind of with you. I don't see how they move the ball.
Yeah. Let's get to the pick here. And on top of that, I think Clemson's going to get Peter Woods back. I think he was close to going last night. He hasn't played since midway through the App State game. That ain't good for Florida State. 15.5 points still. I think you just got to take Clemson blindly. Like, I don't, huh?
That feels kind of low, honestly.
To me too. Like,
think
don't.
Clemson's trying to pound teams right now. Like they're not really
Yes.
taking foot off. They're trying to score a lot. I think they want to start get rolling like the vintage 2017 kind of Clemson teams look like. And they're really trying to step on throats. I have no doubt they want to reassert their dominance after Florida State got them last year. So I think they're going to try to speed bag them. I think Florida State, I don't know how that team can be in any way interested in playing any more football. Like those guys didn't go there to go 1-4 and like look like a bottom tier team, not only in the ACC, but almost like the FBS. So I don't know how they're in any way interested in this.
And you look at home field advantage. Like, is that even home? Like, I feel like that could work against Florida State. Like, I think the crowd is going to
do them. I feel like,
yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like, we'll see. Clemson in the points. Dill, I think you're right. We're going to take a deeper dive into Clemson's offense because I want to cook there and really dive into what we've seen from this Clemson offense. We'll cut it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.